All right. Okay. Thank you, Roger. I should say before I start that I I tried to read through my presentation. I tried it last yesterday. I realized it was pretty long. It was hard to fit it in within 12 minutes. But I think it will work. Perhaps I will be a bit quicker now, and I will give you basically the introduction of the study, the main concepts that I'm using my argument basically. But if there's time, there will be some pictures of the more images of the more jammy stuff and some illustrations of my arguments. So this is a paper. It's about the development of sensory science, and it is about flavor. And flavor is a key concept for me and for this paper. And this is not the only paper on sensory science here at this conference, but anyway, so you will be familiar with this, many of you, but let us think for a minute about what flavor is and why flavor is kind of complicated as an object for science. Here's an illustration from actually a paper by a Swedish sensory scientist, Erik von Sydow. And it illustrates the complexity in a way, I think. Flavor occurs only when you consume something, when you bite into something like the strawberry, I think it is in this picture. When you're done, it disappears. And it's ephemeral. It's something that occurs very quickly, it disappears. It's, of course, also subjective, individual. It's a phenomenological quality. So it's an elusive property for science. So sensory science is a special form of science dealing with a very complicated matter, you can say. And there are two themes of my paper. They are related to one another, of course. But the first one, what I do is to try to describe the internal changes in the development of sensory science and the special methods used and developed. But also I try to relate those to external factors, particularly the economy. Basically trying to say something about the economic structures, the changes in the economy, specifically the second wave of industrialization and how that shaped and developed sensory science. So this is a huge topic. You can write not only one book about this, but several, I would guess. But my method, so to say, is that I've studied scientific literature in the time period from the 1930s to the 1960s. This is the time of it's a breakthrough time for sensory science in the food industry. It's based on the material, the scientific material, that's journal articles, books, reports, etc. It's mainly US material, but by studying that, I think I also will cover a more global change in in sensory science, because this is reported in the material. What I do and what perhaps is special about this paper is I like to present a view from the laboratory. I'm focusing on the laboratory techniques, the methods, the techniques, and the instruments used, and try to tell a story and write history from that. So I talk about a chase in the title, chasing flavor, and I'm going to explain to you why and what I mean with that. A main concept here is the concept of epistemic thing. This is a concept coined, as far as I know, by the German historian of science Hans-Jörg Reinberger. And I think my interpretation of epistemic thing here is that in all forms of science, there are epistemic things. This is the the thing that you see through your instruments, through your methods, through your procedures, is what you want to understand. You understand parts of it. It's obvious that it exists. It's something, but you want to know more. You develop methods and techniques. You gain more understanding, also more questions and problems about that object. So it's an elusive thing that motivates scientists. This is very much an internalist interpretation of science and why scientists do what they do, what motivating them. And Reinberg himself, he studied protein research. I think that the idea of an epistemic thing works very well to describe sensory science. And there's an illustration I found of this, and I'm very glad that I found it, because it's a very good illustration of what I think is the epistemic thing of sensory science and flavor. This is from a cover of a book published in the 1950s by Arthur D. Little called Food Acceptance Testing Methodology. And as you can see, all the senses, the 5 senses, they are represented here: the ear, the eye, the nose, etc. But in the middle, there's this mysterious thing. It's a white box with a black X. For some reason, I don't know. I have no idea about the thoughts behind this this cover, this image of the cover. But I'm suspecting that they are thinking in the same way that I do. But flavor is an epistemic thing. It's elusive. We cannot really describe it in clear terms. But it's there. We know what it is. So that is the epistemic thing. Flavor is that. And this brings me to the second concept. And this is also from Reinberger. And that is experimental systems. And this is a very straightforward concept, I think. At least this is how I interpret it. It is basically all of the methods, the techniques, the machines, etc., used and applied for understanding a problem within the scientific context. For understanding this epistemic thing, it's not necessarily, and perhaps usually not, just placed in one research setting. This could be found this could stretch throughout the world. You can have parts in Japan and Sweden and in the US, just to illustrate. But they are sort of tackling, they try to understand the same epistemic thing. And in sensory science, if you think about an experimental system, I like to pinpoint 3 different modes of representing sensory knowledge and mediating flavor. And this is an important part of the paper. The first one is what I call sensory calibration. And I think that when you think of sensory science, if you know anything about sensory science, this is what you think of. This is smelling and tasting in a very controlled way. It's strict protocols. It's sitting down in a laboratory setting and try to act in a way as a laboratory instrument. In the field of sensory science, this is usually called organoleptics or organoleptic analysis, basically using your senses directly. So this is the basic mode. This is what it sort of all boils down to. But there are other modes of mediating sensory knowledge and flavor of importance. And the second one I'm suggesting here is what I call sensory extension. I think in the paper I use an enhancement. I think extension works better. And this is about using tools and techniques that could extend your senses. There are ranges of such techniques, but the most important one, I think, in sensory science, that is gas chromatography, developed in the 1940s, 50s. Basically,
Ingemar, 2 minutes.
2 minutes, okay, but that's fine. basically giving very clear images of what flavor or flavor compounds are. So, and the last one, the most fascinating one, I think, is what I call sensory imitation. It's about building replicas of the human body in order to obtain a more, as they would say, objective understanding of flavor. This is specifically used within texture analysis. So all these different techniques, these modes, I would say it's about transforming the flavor as an epistemic thing, the elusive stuff, into something that can be controlled by scientists and controlled by science. Is becoming an object of scientific inquiry. So just to start summarizing a bit then, this was the epistemic aspects of it. And of course, food sensory science, that's an industrial science. It has to do with the economy.
Oh, 1 minute.
1 minute, yeah. So why was this important? And I bring up two concepts that concerns the economy in my conclusions. And one of them is sensitization. That's a biological concept originally. Basically, what I mean is that actors are becoming more and more sensuous. It's a reciprocal process that when consumers and producers of goods are gaining a more finely tuned sensibility. And I think this is a theme that many of our papers perhaps would relate to, and this is one way of describing it. The second one is economization, a concept by primarily associated with Michel Calon, the sociologist. It's about producing and creating stable networks between consumers and the producers and the commodities produced. And I think that what I talked about, standardization, is a key concept here. It's about having a standardized language that could be translated and understood through between those different actors, and can be sort of being used in the process of making goods, the products. So, well, basically, I think my minutes, it's probably up. So I'm going to end there and say thank you.